This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Geoff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. Valerie Woods, Speaker of the House of Representatives in Belize, and Dr. Michelle Haywood, Member of the House of Keys in the Isle of Man. Welcome to Human Coin Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's nice to see you both again since the CPA Small Islands workshop that we had in the Maldives.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it.
It seems like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it?
Yep.
I'm very excited to have this conversation. We haven't done a lot of conversations like this on the Human Coin podcast, so I'm excited to get started. My starting point into these issues is often the fact that the United Nations, the the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, have 5.1 has the number of women in Parliament as a goal. And it seems to me that is a very hard number to those targets are a hard number to achieve and are not going up globally. As women parliamentarians, can you comment on why you think that's the case? Michelle, why don't we start with you?
So I think the Isle of Man is doing relatively well in terms of that. So we are almost a gender balanced parliament. But I think in small jurisdictions, it becomes one of those things of the numbers. This is the first time ever this House was elected in 2021, and it's the first time the number of women has been this high. I think the highest number last time was 5 out of the 24 representatives. So we're at 10 now out of 24. So we're not quite balanced, but our legislative council is gender balanced as well. So, we kind of, I think we're doing okay, but I don't think that's because of any concerted support for women standing. Most of us are independents anyway. So there's no positive selection lists going on in order to drive the number of women up in Parliament here.
So what is the cause then, if not any concerted effort?
I think maybe we're in lucky timing. There were a number of competent women who felt that they could put themselves forward to stand. And I think if you look back through the history of women in Tynwald, there have always been women who tend to come from a background of either education or nursing or local authority spheres. And certainly that was true for the first nine out of 10, the first women members in the House of Keys came from those backgrounds. And I think even now, there's quite a few people who have come through from education or from healthcare that have moved into politics. And I think perhaps navigating those professions maybe equips you for some of the navigation you need to do through a political career.
Interesting. Valerie, how about yourself? In Belize, I guess women hold 4 of the 31 elected seats in the House of Representatives and 4 of the 13 of the Senate.
So, in the House, elected as in electoral politics, it's actually 3 because the Speaker is elected from among not from among, but the 31 members of the House Representative can elect a person either from among themselves to be the Speaker or from outside. And I was elected from outside. So I don't get to share, I think, in Michelle's more positive outlook, unfortunately. With 3 members electoral politics, 3 of the elected members of the 31 seats, it's pretty low. And it's dismal is the word I'm looking for, really. These figures, I won't use the word progress because from not having any members in our House of Representatives some years ago, to now having gone from having 1 member to 3. I guess one should say that is going in the right direction, but it really underlines to me the distance that we have to go. And, CPA and many other networks have highlighted this, not just for Belize, but for quite a few of our Caribbean jurisdictions. It's very low. And the cause for it, I still think Belize is challenged with this patriarchal culture, this norm that leadership, despite approaching 45 years of independence, still comes in a masculine form when it comes to elections and politics and governance. Um, and while the political parties both have supported and advocated for more women, and even in their constitutions or bylaws ask for a minimum of 30%, there's not an active push or program to have women on the ballot, because that is the only way you're going to get them into the elected House of Representatives. So there has been some discussions around is it time, or when, how soon can we start looking at how we can make that more institutional? But there has been no real push. So unfortunately, in 2026, the elected House of Representatives still only has 3 women, which simply not reflective or representative of the of the population, where women accounts for half of the population.
And Michelle, you have multi-member districts, if I'm not mistaken, right? You've got 2 members per district.
Two members per constituency. Yeah,
Per
so we have 12
constituency.
constituencies and then 2 per constituency.
Right.
And we have 2 constituencies who are entirely represented by women in the current House, and then the others are split. So yeah, but it does mean we share some of the workload. But yeah, it's ones in Douglas in our capital city. There are 4 constituencies there, and 2 of those are all women representation. And I think that kind of reflects that the population in Douglas tends to be younger, and they've grown up with the Equality Act being over them, and I don't think that they see. I don't think the patriarchal view is so strong in the next generation, and I think that's reflected in the elections that we have here.
I'm holding out for the youth here too, Michelle. I really am. Because as in your case, the representation influence on committees in the parliamentary work would be a lot stronger. In our case, there's only 3 women, right, available to serve on committees, to contribute to debates, to sponsor or champion issues from the lower house, and to really be involved in the shaping of public policy, and to even be involved in the executive of the government. So it speaks to how far we have to go in terms of party structures, and it speaks to the fact that there's not a lot of opportunities for shaping or influencing of legislation because of so few numbers. So it's very difficult.
And I think what follows through for us as well is, out of the council of ministers, there's 8 ministers and then the chief minister. But out of the 8 ministers, 4 of those are women. And so, and they head up important, I was going to say, almost it was a little bit of a kind of gendering in that. So health and education, but also the Department of Home Affairs and Justice is headed up by a woman, and so is DEFA, it's the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture. And I think, particularly in Home Affairs and Justice, I think that's been a big help, because we've been doing lots of legislation around sexual violence and updating that. And I think having had a woman minister in charge of bringing that legislation forward has helped, keep the progress up.
Yeah,
I think you've both, from what I understood from the obviously had the benefit of meeting during the Small Islands workshop, that you've both advocated and used used is maybe the wrong word, but you've utilized your position as members of parliament to advocate for gender equality, LGBTQ plus rights, and minority rights. Do you want to both talk a little bit about your personal stories on that, like how you've done that? Valerie, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So as speaker, obviously my objective is to always ensure that debates are fair and that I remain impartial. Um, so my journey really began in terms of advocating for LGBT rights in particular. Uh, it began when I was not speaker, but when I was a member of the Senate and I was an
Right.
opposition member. So on it was in 2016 when the decision on Section 53 of our laws were, the we made the we reached, if you will, a constitutional milestone where same sex was not criminalized as a result. And while that was such a fundamental milestone for human rights, for LGBT rights, there wasn't a lot of chatter in the parliament about it. And so I had stood up in the Senate and to recognize that Belize, with that win in court, had made a huge um, contribution to the human rights discussion globally, locally, nationally, regionally. But I recognize that legal recognition and social acceptance, they don't always move at the same pace. So,
Mhm.
in fact, I think it's very rare. And so there's still a need for respectful national dialogue. There's still a need for protection from discrimination, greater public education. Um, and in my role as speaker, while as I can't be partisan and I can't be as prominent, if you will, in my specific views, what I do try to do is encourage space for the discussion, encourage opportunities for awareness about minority rights, LGBTQ rights. And I've done a lot of that by way of my membership in Parliamentarians for Global Action. And I remain a member despite uh, having be- having become the speaker. I did not
Mhm.
not to continue being a member of that network, and I try to encourage other members of Parliament to find those networks, to at least at the minimum to be educated on the issue of human rights, LGBTQ rights, minority rights. Because by way of being educated, I think every member of Parliament can then have more confidence in raising the issue, bringing the issue, championing the issue, debating, and having contribution and legislation with that lens in mind.
Yeah, that's very important, and I want to come back to this issue of how MPs or members of parliament find their voice outside of the traditional institutional structures, which can often be so constraining. Michelle, why don't you tell us an example of the work that you've done around these issues?
So I think one of the things to recognise for the Isle of Man is that we were really late changing our laws around homosexuality,
Yeah.
and then in fact, it wasn't until 1992, and there was before that there was considerable, almost persecution of homosexuals on the island, which has left a scar across families, and the police targeted people and recording them in public spaces and then broadcasting names on national radio, and it was an awful situation. And finally, in 2022, so 30 years after it was decriminalised, the chief constable of the time apologised for the actions of the constabulary, and that goes some way to kind of trying to rebuild the relationships from the past. But I think what Valerie said is that legal reforms, that it's only part of the picture. It's what actually happens in our society, and it's the access to services and workplace culture and public attitudes. And we didn't get an Equality Act through until 2017. And it didn't come into force until 2020. So we were a decade behind the UK in terms of making sure that we'd got some legal protection there. And we still get barriers reported now. So it's Pride Month over here. I happily have worked with the Isle of Pride group for a number of years now. I run a film festival for them because I have the ability to book films out, and I'm a license holder for the cinema. So we set that all up, but you see instantly the promotion starts to go out for those activities, that you'll get the usual tropes of, well, when is it? When is it not? Yeah, when is it straight month? And when is it? It's that kind of, people want to batter it down still, and it concerns me enormously. One of the local hospitality venues had signs up. They converted all their toilets to unisex toilets and just said, they're all single cubicles anyway with wash basins. Just use whichever toilet. And the signs were vandalised because somebody decided that just even changing how the toilet layout was not an acceptable thing to adaptation. And that worries me enormously. And we see that, I think, still coming through. And I think one of the things that Valerie said was about enabling people to talk about it. The more we mention it, the more that we stand up and we say LGBTQ plus people, and the more we talk about women's rights and the more we talk about minority backgrounds, the more it gives scope for other people to be able to talk about it, and to normalise that as not being something that for the island was hidden away for a very long time. We have to keep doing that and keep stepping forward. We have had Pride festivals here that slightly before my time, and Pride marches and things which are very well supported, but there is still this backlash that occurs. It's deeply ingrained in some people, and I think again it is partly a generational thing, that there's almost a fear element in some of the older people, really not liking the idea that LGBTQ plus people are there and can pick their own pronouns, and not wanting to give them their own sort of self-determination.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Valerie, did you want to jump in on that, please?
yeah, just to jump on the point that Michelle made about the Equality Act, the Isle of Man coming, I think decades after. It's similar in Belize. We don't even have an Equality Act, despite that constitutional win in 2016. Now, there has been attempts, don't get me wrong, to bring to the parliament to introduce an equal opportunity bill, but it simply has not made its way to the parliament to even had a first reading. And that speaks to the very thing that Michelle was saying, that we can win these things legally, constitutionally, but socially, and even with the members of parliament, because there is this constant fear that it will reflect negatively at the ballot for them at the next election. And so they are so wary. And it's been one of those uh, areas of legislation that, while it has been spoken about, while there has been a section and a growing, I'd like to think, a growing section of the community that says we need to do better by having this bill in place, it has not even been able to be introduced, to even be debated. My role as speaker is really, it's not to advocate for a position while I'm in the chair, but it's to ensure that the parliament provides a fair, an orderly, and a respectful space for the debate, ensuring all sides are heard, and applying the standing orders consistently through such a debate, knowing that there will be possibly adamant persons for and adamant positions for and adamant positions against. So it doesn't, my neutrality doesn't, I don't want it to be viewed as indifference. It's really to protect the holy grail, if I could call it that, of the chair, which is to protect the fairness of the process. And so that the discussion on any legislation, and perhaps even more so on a human rights one, on LGBT rights, on minority rights, that it is properly deliberated on and given that sufficient space. But unfortunately, I'm glad to hear Isle of Man has an Equality Act. Belize is nowhere near it. 10 years after the win.
And let's talk about the backlash for a moment, or a couple of minutes. We here in Canada, same-sex marriage was legalized, I think, in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And what I'm seeing is a backlash on transgender rights, right? Here in the province that I live in New Brunswick, the previous government implemented a policy that basically didn't allow children to ask their teachers to call them by their chosen pronouns, or name change. Two provinces in Canada have basically invoked the notwithstanding or override clause on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to legislate against transgender rights, or to invoke policies against transgender rights. I would consider that a backlash. How is that backlash affected? If you both mentioned the term backlash in your comments, how has that backlash affected the work that you're trying to do, and you as women members of Parliament, in terms of the way that people who don't agree interact with you? Interact would be a very nice way of putting it. Valerie, why don't we start with you?
I can't say that I've had any personal backlash as an ally, even when I was in the Senate. If I'm to be fair, Belize is very small. Everybody knows everybody here. And have I had some ad hominem attacks against me on social media by way of maybe a text or two? Yes, but it comes with the territory of being in public life, and some people are extremely passionate. But even that, it wasn't sustained. What I do think, though, has been a backlash is that it's particularly from the religious movement, and by particularly the evangelical movement, in my observation, is that there has been a hesitancy on the part of those in in government and in Parliament to take up the issue, to move it to the next natural step, which would be the proposed Equal Opportunities Bill. There hasn't been a drive, if you will, to see it at least be debated. I think that has been a backlash, because it has, while there has been attempts to have consultations, it hasn't moved. It seems to have stagnated. And we are now, like I said, 10 years past the constitutional case. And the issues haven't disappeared. Belize's LGBT community is growing. I shouldn't say it's not to suggest that. I don't mean growing in terms of increase of numbers. I'm saying the awareness has grown. We have Pride, a Pride Week. Not that it's formal in the sense that it's not recognized in calendar, but the LGBT community used the week of the constitutional case, when it was won in August, to be a week of celebration. And that week, over the past several years in August, has resulted in several events. Now, I think there's some progress in the sense that there is not, as what I've seen in other jurisdictions, there's not, I don't see a huge outcry against the week. I don't see assaults happening against any activity or persons participating in the activities. And I take that as a step in the positive direction. I'm not suggesting that it's sufficient, but I have to, coming from the vantage point of where it was such a taboo matter, I have to celebrate where I see change, even in its incremental format.
Sure.
We actually have LGBT community organizations that are recognized, that are consulted with, that are um, given that space to provide the input on legislation. The fact that we can even have Pride Week, these are things that we take for granted existed, and they didn't exist before.
Mm.
Is it enough? Absolutely not, because we don't have an equal opportunities bill in Belize. And every time there's an attempt, the movement against it, especially from the religious, grows. It just grows very strong, and that is what I think. I don't want to use the word intimidate, but certainly puts a pause on some of the members trying to advance it forward.
Interesting. Michelle, how about yourself?
I was just actually thinking, and you're right. It's the religious beliefs that tend to get in the way. But I think we've probably during the term of this parliament we've rather diverted them, because we've been debating taking the automatic vote away from the bishop in Tynwald after probably probably about 800 years or so. There are very few places in the world where clerics are nominated to a parliament and receive a vote. And I think it put us in the same category as Iraq, maybe, um, or Iran, and perhaps jurisdictions where we wouldn't aspire to match their parliamentary procedures. So that's been one bit that's certainly diverted the religious right quite a bit. And then the other one that we've been debating is assisted dying recently, and so that's become couched in religion as well. And I suspect they have a limited capacity to keep fighting on every front. Whereas I think because two of the current ministers were directors of the Isle of Man Pride Festival when it was on, and we are speaking more freely now. I think there's almost a I think we are holding up a bit of a barrier of saying, you're not touching this, and there hasn't been many sort of official overtures towards it. I think what we do see still is quite a bit of commentary on social media, but it's a small community, and as somebody's done the calculations, it probably only takes about 40 people on social media to create the impression that the whole island thinks one way. By the time you allow for the fact that more than half the accounts now on Facebook are bot accounts, and the algorithms will drive any negative comment will be amplified immediately and leapt on, because that's how Meta sells advertising, isn't it? So that level of engagement shouldn't be taken as a barometer, I think, of how the public generally see. We have odd flare-ups occasionally, what's taught in PSHE classes in school, perhaps, and whether a local poet who happens to dress in a variety of clothing depending on how they feel on the day, and did turn up in female clothing, but to present a poetry session, whether that was a drag queen doing a promotion in school, and if this was all awful, and we see odd incidents like that trigger a backlash. I think generally, from a parliamentary perspective, we're doing a reasonably good defence of where we are, and we've almost made it so that it's not a sector that you can try and attack through the political system.
Really interesting. Let's change tack a little bit and talk a bit about, for example, in the case of Valerie, the Women's Parliamentary Caucus in Belize. I had mentioned that I was hoping to get back to this issue of what are some of the ways that parliamentarians can use their voice to advocate for issues around gender equality, LGBTQ plus rights, minority rights, et cetera, et cetera. Maya Hutman, who is not only the producer of the podcast, but also my gender equality specialist, she was saying earlier before that this was she was under the impression this was your brainchild. The Women's Parliamentary Caucus was something that you had put together. Do you want to tell us a bit about how that caucus is used to, or how it's succeeded in supporting the type of issues that we're talking about today?
So the caucus, again, when I was a member of the Senate, an opposition senator, as low as the numbers were in the House for women, and in the Senate, it's a little bit better. The Senate is 13. I will hasten to add, Michelle, that in our Senate, constitutionally, we do have a member representing the churches. So we will always have that, because if that is to change, that has to be constitutionally amended, and that's not going to happen. I don't see
It
that
was the
happening anytime.
constitution bill for us. We've allowed the bishop to keep the seat and to have a voice, but just not to have a vote.
Ah, okay. That would be a lot difficult here. That would be a lot difficult here. But yes, so in the Senate, what I did was I reached across the party lines, and both in the lower house as well as in the Senate, and asked if, despite our low numbers, collectively together, there would have been about 9 or so of us, and if we would consider that having a caucus, a women's parliamentary caucus. Conversation was positive. Election was called. Government was changed. Then I became the speaker, so I couldn't be as active in advancing that. However, there was interest, and so what I did was facilitate. Given that I was there before in the last session, and I facilitated up to the point of being just interim chair until the women who were elected and appointed through the Senate, those elected in the House, till they determined who they wanted to chair. And so we have a chair who is actually from the Senate and who represents represents no political party. Her um, her association in the Senate is from the network of non-government organizations. And so that worked out really well. And what the achievements really, in my view, it's still young. This was really established in 2023. So it's about 3 years with a general election in between. So, things take a while. The wheels of government, as they say, right, do turn, but sometimes rather slowly. And this is one of the cases because it's a standing committee of the House of Representatives, but it's a joint standing committee made up of both chambers. And by doing that, it means that there's no question moving forward, despite the results of any election. If there's interest and the will of the women parliamentary members, there can be an active women parliamentary caucus. It's been established now in standing orders. And in its short 3 years to date, I think the caucus has been able to raise the visibility of women's issues in Parliament through the caucus, by recognizing that they are a member of this caucus and that these issues are so important. I think maybe not in as great a degree as one would want, but I'd like to say that it's still in its nascent stages. I think it has strengthened or at least encouraged cross-party dialogue among women parliamentarians by having, if you will, rules of engagement, meaning nothing that will obviously spark partisan passion and debate, but things that are common thread for women, regardless of which political party they support. I think another achievement is that they've built capacity through partnerships with UN agencies, with Parliamentarians. Belize just recently held, earlier this year, the first Young Women in Leadership program, and that was hosted through the Women's Parliamentary Caucus with the help of Parliamentarians and CWIL and the Ministry of Human Development here. And I think what it has done, perhaps not in the most visible way, but because again, these things have a way, right, Michelle? We take it for granted when it becomes so norm that we forgot it wasn't so normal before. But I think what it has done is allowed free discussion of things that perhaps we wouldn't have raised. And that includes gender equality issues, which I think are all issues. They're being looked at through a lens from a woman's perspective, whereas before that wasn't necessarily the norm. It has created, I think, an opportunity for the group of women parliamentarians to critically look at legislation from specifically their perspective as women. So to make sure that it's not just looking at the face value of the legislation, but being very specific and deliberate about the impact from a woman's perspective or a minority group perspective.
Based on lived experience.
It's based on lived experience, exactly. So it's 3 years young, very nascent. They have a strategic plan. The caucus has worked deliberately in trying to not be overly ambitious, but at the same time to make their presence known. And through social media platforms now with the parliament, the Women's Parliamentary Caucus also features in that. So it's becoming, I won't hasten to say mainstream, but it's becoming a part and parcel of the structure of parliament so that the community at large can recognize, wait, this is something different, it's progressive, and there are perspectives here that we should be listening to.
So interesting. Michelle?
I'm really jealous. So one of the discussions I had probably about a year after the election with the deputy speaker, who's a member of the House of Keys, who the woman she's in her third term now, I think, was, could we get a women's caucus up and running? And despite the fact that we were both really busy, we played around at trying to get it working and just have managed to fail. And so I'm kind of in awe of the fact that you've managed to succeed. What we have done though, and what has come through, because members can obviously bring motions to change how we work, is we have done things like we've curtailed the late night sittings. And so standardly we would have stopped at 8 o'clock at night, but if we have several members with young families, and we have members who have older relatives with caring responsibilities as well, and the kind of the almost macho culture of, well, sometimes we'll sit until midnight. And we've all done that. Yeah, we'll just come back the next day and carry on. It's all right. And you can see the argument at the time was the quality of debate and everything, particularly once you started getting to 8, 9 o'clock at night, things would get nodded through because people were just getting tired, and the debate wasn't at the level that you would expect. And so it's kind of, although it's a real advantage for those with young families, particularly the women with young families, to know that they're going home at a reasonable time. I think it's an advantage to the Parliament generally. I think we've also then changed our sitting dates as well. So we've recognised when school holidays come in as well, and we've moved things around. And if you look at the calendar originally, it was set by the farming calendar and harvest. There was a long summer recess because you had to get as far as harvest. So we don't come back from summer recess until October, and that's ridiculous. So we've pulled that forward now, and there've been little tweaks like that we've been making on the way through. What we have done as a group of women, and I led on this, is that every 3 or 4 months everyone's invited, whether they're in the upper or the lower chamber, so whether in the LegCo or the House of Keys, that we all go out somewhere, usually in a private dining room somewhere, so we can talk freely, because our conversations will range between the personal between us and the political, and probably not the sort of conversation you want to have in a public sphere. But yeah, so we book ourselves somewhere, and they've been really well attended, actually. There's a couple of people who just never attended them at all. But what you find from those evenings is that it builds that support network within the women within Parliament, and just that chance to talk informally. And we don't always stick to the informal topics. Even there'll be sparks into somebody's battling with a bit of legislation and those connections, but just giving us the chance to be together when it's not in a parliamentary sitting, gives us the chance to be together. And they go on for, we do a kind of good 4-hour, 5-hour stint of really excellent communicating, but it has kind of acted as a support network for most of us. And I think that's been really helped by some of the returning members from last time, who have been sort of mentoring and ensuring that, when I came through as a departmental member into DEFA, and was handed the animal welfare bill, which was a bill that had failed in the last administration, was handed the rewrite of that to bring through and then to stand and deliver, and never expected as a backbencher, sort of 6 months in, to be standing there delivering a really significant bill. But it's because the minister took the view of, actually, we are going to mentor you through these processes. We are going to sort of get you into the system. And so I think it's been, the way has been smoothed for us a little bit by having ministers that were prepared to do that sort of induction into the system.
And speaking of ministers, Michelle, that's one question I wanted to ask you was, as Valerie, you had mentioned some of the constraints that you face as speaker in advancing these issues. Michelle, you were in cabinet until quite recently. Is that a enabling feature or a drawback to advancing these issues, or both?
I think it can be a little bit of a drawback, because I think just the workload that comes with being a minister, so obviously within your own department, when you're doing a policy development, I've got eyes on it there, and it was never going to be an issue that things weren't balanced and equal. But I think once you're into that role, the workload is so heavy that the chance to look outside and look at the bigger picture, and to bring about other changes that would make things more equal and improve our inclusion, it's not within your scope to deliver, I don't think. And so a lot of that has come through from backbenchers, bringing motions through and driving that forward.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Valerie, any concluding remarks on your side?
Yeah, the challenge I've found from the vantage point that I now have is that it's to move beyond symbolic support um, on gender equality, and to ensure that it is actually treated as a practical governance issue. And so that would mean you see it in the budgets, you see it in the legislation, you see it in committee scrutiny, you see it in appointments, measurable outcomes. So while I'm very glad, Michelle and Geoff, that we don't, in light of not having women members, the numbers that I would love to see in Parliament, there has been a concerted effort that the heads of departments and the CEOs in ministries, that they are women, and at an increasing amount, an increasing number than ever before. Decisions are made at the cabinet level, and decisions are made in Parliament, and that's where we need to see more women. And I think if we can find a way in our small jurisdiction to just move that needle and get a little bit more towards critical mass, especially in the lower house, I think it would make a huge difference in the legislation coming out, in policy coming out, and in the robust debates. Listen, we're speaking to the converted here. Members will disagree. It's not may disagree. They will disagree strongly. But we can do so in a way that upholds dignity of Parliament and the dignity of the people affected by the issues. I happen to be, and I'll sound very biased here, but I happen to think that we get there with a more critical mass of gender balance in the Parliament. A mature parliamentary culture allows for very difficult issues to be debated without ad hominem attacks, without stereotypes, and certainly without exclusion. So that would be my last intervention here, and how I'd close off. I like the speaker role. It's such an honor, but it is also a bit of a constraint for somebody that was a bit more active in terms of voicing my opinion. So, but I am learning each day and with each Parliament at least how to create the space for divergent views and to be as fair as possible in allowing the discussions, and then to work with partners and to work with agencies and colleagues across the CPA to see how they tackle some of these things that we're tackling in this small branch that we have.
And speaking of the CPA, this is an opportunity to mention that this podcast will also be broadcast as part of the CPA's Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth podcast. I want to thank you both very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and to see you both again, Honorable Valerie Woods, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Belize, and Dr. Michelle Haywood, member of the House of Keys in the Isle of Man. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspectives as women parliamentarians. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you too.
Thanks.
Humankind is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.